Kenya's coastline, it's famous for these incredible white sand beaches. It's basically paradise for anyone who goes there. But what happens when that paradise gets a for sale sign slapped on it? A new government plan to develop this pristine coast has kicked off this huge debate, and it's putting billion-dollar investments head-to-head with the rights of the public.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll dive into the government's ambitious Paradise Plan and the massive economic bet they're making. Then we'll get into why it's causing such an uproar, dig into the heart of the land rights dispute, and finally, look at what this all means for the future of Kenya's coast.
So, what is this plan actually all about? Well, it comes from a new draft of the National Tourism Strategy, and it lays out a really bold and, as it turns out, very controversial vision for the country's coastline.
The plan zeroes in on 9 specific publicly owned locations. And we're not talking about just any old spots here. These are some of the most beautiful, most beloved parts of the coast. Land that, right now, is open and accessible to absolutely everyone.
And the ambition here is huge. The proposal is talking about handing over 5 public beaches and 4 entire islands to private developers. The whole idea is for them to build these high-end luxury eco-resorts and exclusive tourist sites on long-term leases.
To put this on the map for you, this plan directly hits 3 key coastal counties: Kwale, Lamu, and Kilifi. And for these communities, their culture, their livelihoods, it's all deeply connected to the sea and the shore.
So, you have to ask, why is the government pushing this so hard? Well, this isn't some random idea. It's a core part of their economic strategy for 2025 all the way through 2030. So what are they trying to get out of this?
Officially, the Ministry of Tourism is making a pretty compelling case. They argue this plan is going to attract major investment, it's going to create jobs, and, this is a big one, it'll help Kenya's tourism economy grow beyond its world-famous safaris. They even promise to protect the environment and guarantee that some zones will stay open for public access. On paper, it really does sound like a perfect win-win.
Right. If the plan promises jobs, investment, and even keeps some public access, what's the big deal? Well, it turns out a huge part of the Kenyan public sees things very, very differently.
The second this draft strategy was released, a backlash just erupted, especially all over social media. And this isn't just a simple disagreement over policy. For a lot of people, this feels like a full-blown constitutional crisis.
And this is where you can see the two competing stories just collide. Where the government sees economic diversity and investment, critics see potential violations of the Constitution. Where the government is promising to create jobs, the public is afraid they're going to lose free access to their own beaches. And where the government imagines luxury ecotourism, local communities are terrified they'll be pushed out.
To really understand these fears, you have to look beyond the business plan and go right to the supreme law of the land, the Kenyan Constitution itself.
The entire debate really hinges on one specific part of that Constitution, Article 62. It explicitly defines public land as including all beaches and islands. Legally, what that means is that the state holds this land in trust for the people. In other words, it belongs to everyone.
And that brings us to the core legal question that critics are shouting from the rooftops. If these beaches and islands constitutionally belong to the public, can the government just turn around and legally lease them to private companies for decades at a time, potentially locking out generations of Kenyans? That's the fundamental conflict right there.
So, with such a clear divide between the government's vision and the public's concerns, where does that leave everything? What happens now? Okay, this is really important to remember. This is still just a draft proposal. Nothing is set in stone yet. The public outcry has happened early enough in the process that it could genuinely change the final outcome.
Now, in response to all that backlash, the Ministry of Tourism has publicly said, okay, we hear you. They've stated that public consultations are now being planned to deal with these deep-seated fears about land rights and access. So the next few months are going to be absolutely critical in figuring out if this plan moves forward, gets changed, or is just scrapped altogether.
This whole debate really boils down to one huge question, and not just for Kenya, but for countries all over the world. In the race for economic development and progress, how do you protect priceless public heritage? Can progress and preservation actually coexist on Kenya's coast? That is the multi-billion-dollar question that's still waiting for an answer.